Hey y'all, I'm Shauna. Welcome in or welcome back and welcome to a new video. Today we are circling back to talking about hobbies. Now, a few weeks ago, I made a video on hobbies and why I think it's important to find a hobby if you're somebody who wants to change your shopping habits. I received an overwhelming amount of comments in that video talking about how your hobby contributes to your shopping problem, or that your shopping problem comes from your hobby or hobbies. I definitely hear you that hobbies can become spending traps. So today we are going to be talking about some ideas, some strategies, some things to consider when it comes to hobby spending. I just wanted to jump into it because there is so much to talk about today. And the first thing I want to talk about is new hobbies. We will talk about some strategies for new hobbies, recurring hobbies, and things like that, because sometimes the thing to do is more about paying attention to the shopping than the hobby, which we'll talk about later. There's a few things to know before we start. The first is that not everything we'll discuss today is applicable to every hobby or circumstance. Sometimes we'll be talking about the first thing we'll be talking about will only apply to specific hobbies. The second thing is that even if it is applicable to you, this video is really just meant to be a case of take what might work for you, leave the rest. And so if only some of this works for you, great. If none of this works for you, also fine. So let's get into it, and let's start off with track records. My number one strategy for dealing with hobbies and hobby spending is a track record. This also works for things beyond hobby spending. It can be applicable to new skills, new things you want to try, other lifestyle components. And this might help you decide if something you're thinking about should or is actually a hobby. So focusing on a track record is essentially focusing on the habits of the thing that you want to try before you invest money. So let's say you want to start painting in 2025. And you have some basic art supplies, nothing really crazy. You don't have a lot either. Some of it's old. Maybe you have some old paint that is a little bit dried up, but you have something to work with. Let's say one of your 2025 goals is to paint at least once a week. Before going out and buying new painting supplies, what this method would suggest would be to focus on developing the track record first. So focusing on setting out the time and space for painting. So in this case, you would focus on when would be a great time to paint and finding the time in your week that would be best for you and playing with that a little bit, and also using what you have in order to focus on setting up the routine of painting. If you don't have paint supplies, maybe in this case, you pull out a YouTube video of somebody watercoloring. And let's say you only have acrylic paint, but you want to watercolor. You would still focus on setting up the habit of taking out art supplies once a week, and you would use your acrylic paints. Maybe you're watching a watercolor tutorial and kind of doing that for a few weeks to see if this is something that you want to do. So let's say you take out your painting supplies and you decide that you want to do it 30 minutes every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Then for, let's say, two Sundays, you take out your supplies at 9 a.m. and you see how that goes. Maybe you decide that morning time sucks, or maybe you decide that actually you don't want to acrylic paint and you think watercoloring is a little bit more interesting. There may not be a perfect solution to your specific hobby, but going with the closest approximation, if possible, would be the goal. Because what I've personally found is that in a lot of cases, what people struggle with is consistency, staying consistent and maintaining the practice of the thing. And so people go to buying new things in order to increase motivation, or out of this belief that they'll be more consistent if they have new things. In reality, something like going to the gym, as an example, buying new workout clothes doesn't inherently make you more consistent. It won't make you work out. It won't change your mind about having to brush off your car at, I don't know, 9 a.m. to go to the gym or to go out in the -15 weather. Your new workout clothes aren't going to do that. Your new workout clothes aren't going to magically fit the gym into your schedule. And so focusing on the track record gives you something to focus on beside the new things. And the thing in question that we're focusing on is actually getting into the practice of doing that thing. Every year in January, like clockwork, for the last 4 years, I've wanted to learn calligraphy. And each year I've said, oh, I'll buy like a calligraphy workbook. And I'm talking about the workbook that has the letters or words or sentences already drawn in. Think like a child's homework, where they're practicing their printing. And so I'm like, oh, that'll be great. But every year, I remember that the internet exists and that YouTube exists and that I have a marker that I could use. I have paper with lines on it that I could practice with. Sure, I don't have the exact height of the letters and it's not the best thing available, but it is something that gets me doing the thing that I want to do in the closest approximation, focusing on building the track record. And every year, again, like clockwork, before January runs out, I don't really care that much about calligraphy. And so this practice shows me that this is not actually a hobby. This is just a little bit of a minor fixation or something of a passing interest that's not really going to stick. And I'm allowed to do that. It's totally fine to do that. And it can be a lot of fun, but not something that I'm going to invest much money into. And lastly about this is that if you give yourself a track record to stick to for, let's say, 4 to 8 weeks, my sweet spot personally is somewhere in there, depending on the thing. It gives me a milestone to work towards. So I can say, or usually say, if I stick with this thing for, let's say in the calligraphy case, 4 weeks, then I can buy the kit off Indigo or Etsy or something like that. And it gives me not just a milestone, but it gives me a metric of success. Relatedly, and something you can use in combination, is to give yourself a hoop to jump through to make your life a little bit more difficult before buying the thing. The point of the hoop, in my opinion, is to give yourself a task that makes things a little bit more difficult to see if you're actually interested in learning about the thing that you are saying you want to be your hobby, and not just buying things. Like, are you willing to put in the effort? Are you willing to put in some time to research, or do you just want to buy some stuff because you're excited about a certain topic? And sometimes it is a little challenging to suss out what's what. A classic example in this case would be doing some research or looking up some videos. So let's say you want to snowboard, but you've never snowboarded before. Maybe your first hurdle would be to watch some basic snowboarding drills to see what that's like. Maybe the second hurdle is to watch some content or read some content about somebody's experiencing snowboarding or speaking to somebody about what it was like to snowboard. Like if you have a cousin or something who snowboards, you can be like, hey, could you let me know what it was like to snowboard? Preferably somebody who is close in age when they learn. So like if you had a cousin who learned to snowboard when they're 6, not going to be the same as your aunt who learned to snowboard when she was 20. Maybe another example would be going around and asking people in your life if they have any equipment that they could let you borrow. For me, a classic example is a sewing machine. I've wanted to learn to sew for the past year, and I've just on several occasions just been like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go and buy a sewing machine. It's pretty difficult to sew without any supplies. And this is also not really something where you can use what you have. One option could be to learn some hand sewing. All you need is a needle and a thread, which I could borrow from somebody. So that could be free $99. Or if you want to get some stuff cheap, like you can buy some sewing supplies for under $5 and you could learn some hand sewing. Or I could talk to somebody in my life who I know has a sewing machine. And I do actually know somebody who does have a sewing machine. So my task has been to ask said person to show me some, like if she has time and is interested, if she could show me some of the basics of the sewing machine. And once I've done that, then I can look into getting my own sewing machine. It's been months, like nearly a year, and I have not done that. This tells me a lot about where my desire to buy the sewing machine might have come from. And what I'll do is I'll let an offer stand, or one of my assignments or hoops that will stand, and I'll let it stand. If there is a point where I go and I ask this person to show me some basics, and she does show me some basics, whenever that happens, then I can go look at a sewing machine. And if I let that stand kind of indefinitely, like that card is still on the table, it is still motivation, and not like, okay, you have 60 days or you'll never be able to buy a sewing machine. Another option to consider in the hoop category for one of your hoops is there a version of this that I could do for free? Some hobbies are easier to figure this out with than others. So in my sewing example, could I do this for free? Learning on a friend's sewing machine would be a way to do that. And I think that this is always a good question to ask, or almost always a good question to ask. Even if your answer is there is no way to do this thing for free, then at least you know, and that you've put in the effort to, let's say, look around to see if somebody might have that thing. A lot of people in our lives, even buy nothing groups, people own stuff that you might think like, oh, who would want to give away X thing for free? There are a lot of people who have stuff, who have supplies that they don't use. And sometimes just talking to friends or family, or, throwing a question out into the universe, the answer might surprise you. Giving yourself tasks or assignments can help you decide if you're interested in shopping, or if some of your desire comes from something like you're caught up in identity and what you would like this hobby to say about you, opposed to something actually being a bona fide hobby. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of strategy would be tiered spending. So some hobbies are not possible to start with a $0 budget. Or maybe you've tried some of these other tactics, right? Maybe you've looked up watercoloring tutorials or videos and you're like, yes, I think this would apply to me. I think I would like it. You've done some art and you found the time in which doing this once a week would be best for you. Well, that still doesn't change the fact that you don't have watercolors. And so this is where the tiered spending comes in. So how much and when you release budget is going to depend on your personal finances, as well as what the thing is. So the point of the tiered budget is to release money in increments that correspond to length of time. So an introductory budget, in my opinion, or kind of what I do personally, is gives me enough money to start off, but it is intentionally restrictive. So you can't go and buy everything and anything. You could go and buy like a base little kit or something simple to start you off. So let's say you want to start knitting, and let's say the average cost of knitting needles is $30 and some yarn is additional $30. I'm not a knitter, so I don't know if those numbers are accurate. Probably not. This is just a hypothetical to kind of give you a jumping off point. So a total would be $60. In this example, the restrictive budget I would give myself would probably be in the ballpark of $30, where I could find something, but it's not the entire amount. So maybe in this example, I go on Facebook Marketplace and I see if somebody has some needles or yarn that I could work with. I did actually go look this up, and I could go into my own community right now and get both of these things for under $40. Maybe you check the thrift store to see if there is something there that you could use. After about 30 days, that is when I would release the next budget. So maybe you get released an additional $30, and then I would release a second wave at about 90 days or a quarter. Depending on the item, like there have been examples where I bought some stationery and releasing another budget wouldn't make sense after 30 days. So I released some more after 90 days, and then something like 6 months might work depending on the item. And so you can release an increasing amount of money, or potentially a sustainable amount of money, if the thing you do requires regular occurrence. Like let's say you want to do chess. Let's say you start off with a free membership. After 30 days, you decide to go to the first tiered paid level, which is let's say $10 a month. And then you're using that for 2 months and you go, you know what? I actually want to go premium. Instead of $10 a month, it's $30 a month. Then that might be fair at that point, as kind of another example. Another example might be basketball. Let's say you want to join a basketball league, but you've never played basketball before, except for maybe in elementary school. So you pay that $8 for the weekly fee. You play it for a few weeks. You realize, yes, this is great. And then you sign up at some point down the line for the league. That's another example of like the tiered budget. An exception might be something like classes, and classes do have a time and a place. And if you're somebody who knows that you like something, or you have a high degree of likelihood that you'll like something, taking a class can come with built-in consistency. Although there is a higher upfront cost to classes, this might be the best way to go about hobby, like certain types of hobby spending, when let's say there could be a higher cost if you did it alone, or you don't want to own physical things. With some physical types of art, you might have to own the mediums in which you're working with if you're going to do it alone, but the art class might provide it for you. Or let's say something like dance. I have tried dance alone, and although I like it, I'm not very consistent with it. After signing up for a class, I am extremely consistent with it because I have that weekly class. It is about $60 a month, so that's not free or cheap in a lot of cases, but I have a track record. It is a hobby, and this keeps me consistent in enjoying something that I like. I just spilled coffee down my shirt. I also think, and maybe this is just me, but I think that even if you have a hobby that is expensive to participate in, or maybe it costs you some money and it's not thousands of dollars a year, maybe it costs you $200 a year to participate, I think most people would benefit also from a free hobby, something that you could do as much as you like, or if you don't want to do it all the time, something you can do on occasion that is like the thing that you can do whenever you like. For me, that example would be reading. And although something like running is also a low-cost hobby for me, there is still the running shoes that I would say is like the most important and can cost money, although you don't need them all the time. So, there's that. But I don't have that cost all the time. So you could say, well, running is generally a low-cost hobby. However, I can't run whenever I want for free because of my climate. In the summer, sure, but now that it's winter, I would need to go indoors. So it's not a true free hobby. For me, reading is the free hobby where I could participate in it to my heart's content, completely 100% free. So if I'm not feeling my other hobbies, or something's not going right, like right now, ballet, we're out of session, I can do that alone, which is great, but I don't have that class, which I really like. And so if I have a hobby that I can dabble into whenever I want, that means that regardless of circumstance, if my finances change and I can't afford to do certain hobbies anymore, I can still have this one thing to lean on. And I'm a voracious reader, and so it's really great to be able to pick up a book literally whenever I want and have that at my disposal. Reading is definitely not everybody's hobby. I'm not saying that your hobby needs to be reading, because some people don't like reading. Other people spend thousands of dollars a year buying books, and they get caught up in the cycle of buying things. The point of saying this is that quite often, free hobbies are such great things to lean on. Now, if you're saying, Shauna, I already have a hobby, what you said isn't really applicable to me, how can you help me out? The section's for you. So if you already have a hobby that you really like and you find yourself spending money on the hobby, often one of the reasons why we spend money on hobbies is because of the pleasure aspect of things. There's a lot of reasons why one can spend money on hobbies. It could just be that they are consistently engaging with content from that hobby. Like a lot of people love to talk about book talk in this respect, that if you're constantly on book talk and watching people haul books and talk excitedly about limited edition and all of that, that it can drum up your excitement and kind of fuel your interest in your hobby. And pleasure can go a long way to driving our habits. So one of the questions I would ask myself and encourage you to ask yourself is, how can you find pleasure in your hobby? How could you get those little bursts of dopamine without spending money? What are some ways to gain pleasure that aren't shopping? Could you gamify your reading or gamify your hobby as one way? Could you do some kind of challenge? Or also, instead of pleasure, you can also think about it through the lens of novelty. How can you gain new and novel experiences without buying things? Maybe you do book swaps with your friends, or you do book recommendations with your friends. Maybe one of the things my library does is blind date with a book. I actually found one of my favorite books of all time. I'm having some trust issues with her. Not my, I'm talking about the series. I found it completely at chance at my library because they were doing a blind date with a book. So how can you find to make using what you have exciting? The last thing would be finding community that isn't into shopping, or finding community aspects outside of shopping. Again, kind of sticking with the book world. Guys, I am a huge Fourth Wing fan. I love it. I love it so much. And I am in the Fourth Wing groups, like the Reddit groups, and I am there, or when I was deep into it, I was there every day reading people's theories about what they think is going to happen or what they think people's signets are, and I was deep in the subreddit. I don't need to spend any money to be in that subreddit. Some people were drawing or painting, or doing like making their own stickers, or some people were like crocheting dragons because they are a crocheter. There are ways to engage in some ways with your hobby that is, free in this sense, but also like sharing things with your friends or in the community and having a community engagement as well. The last thing to talk about is shopping as the hobby, or that your hobby is the driver of your overspending or overconsuming. I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it. I could give you all the suggestions about tiered spending, or creating a budget, or finding free things to do first, or finding novelty, or finding community. Those things are wonderful, but they don't address the shopping as the hobby, or shopping being the problem. And in this case, in my opinion, it's the shopping that's the problem and not the hobby. The suggestions so far are focused on the hobby, and the majority of this video has been talking about how not to spend money on a hobby, or to do it as consciously as possible. And so if our hobbies are the main driver of our shopping, what I think is more helpful then is using shopping strategies and not hobby strategies. I think that talking to a professional is a great step if you think that you have a problem, or really diving into your shopping habits, that's going to be a great place to start, and beyond the scope of this video, to be honest, because if you find yourself over shopping or over consuming or buying more stuff, people do that for different reasons. Sometimes it's for emotional reasons. Sometimes it's to fill voids in our lives. Sometimes it's just some willful negligence. Sometimes it's some impulse control. Sometimes it's a combination or none of these things. And there are so many reasons why this can happen. And I don't want to say, oh, it's this or that, when I don't know about your specific circumstance. So if your hobby is the main driver of a shopping problem, and if you believe that it's impeding your life, I highly encourage you to talk to a professional and or to look at some more stop shopping strategies. You're going to hear a lot about no buy January, and that might not be right for you. No buys are not for everybody. And so I think first learning about why you're shopping, where those desires are coming from, what do you think is influencing your desire to shop, or like where are these desires coming from, is just a good place to start observing your behavior in a non-judgmental way. I can have some content coming on that in just a little bit. In a few days, I'm going to be talking about some skills that one might want to focus on if they want to reduce how they're shopping. I do think, though, as we kind of conclude, that when we have hobbies, we can easily justify overspending on them because they are a love. They are a thing that we like to do. Makeup was definitely my case in point, or I was a big makeup overconsumer, but also makes very much okay shopping as much as I was on makeup. because I love it, because it's my hobby. And I didn't really think longer than that. And it was only really once it started impeding my finances that I began to really consider the role of shopping. And so personally, my hobby spending on makeup took a little bit of a while to happen, but I was able to stop spending money that way once I was able to focus on the stop shopping strategies and not so much the hobby spending strategies. And really, a really useful tool for me was really focusing on contentment. And once I started focusing on contentment with my stuff and experimenting what that looked like, did things really shift for me. For me, that looked like, instead of asking, how do I stop buying stuff? I then turned it to, how can I appreciate what I have? And I think, a classic case of not seeing the forest for the trees, where I wasn't paying attention to what I had. I wasn't seeing my stuff. And if I'm not seeing stuff, and I'm like not seeing that it's there, I'm not appreciating it, my eyes were constantly on the new makeup releases and what's new out there in the hobby world, right? Like if it's books, what are the new limited edition stuffs? What are the new books coming to the market, and constantly keeping my eyes there. Once I removed myself from that and I was able to focus on what I have and worked on contentment, that went a long way into helping me stop shopping. It wasn't everything that I needed, but it did go quite a long way. And I went through a whole contentment year in 2022 where I actively experimented and what does that actually look like? What does contentment with my stuff look like? And I encourage you to do some contentment experimentation yourself. That's the video. That's everything for me today. If you have some strategies that have worked for you that helped you stop shopping in the hobby realm, or help you kind of spend within your means in the hobby realm, of course, budget. Do you have a budget? Do you know what it is? Can you afford it? Budget. Can I say it 5 more times? Budget. Budget. Budget? You have a budget? Yeah, I'm going to shut up about that. So if you have any strategies, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What has worked for you? How do you spend within your means with your hobbies? Love all of that. So thanks so much for watching. Hang out with me today. Love to see you again around here soon for a new day of Vidmas. Thanks for watching. I say thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again.